that talk about the emergency
We're ready, and I've got the agenda on everybody's screen if you wanted to look at that.
Okay, if Vice Chair Glick's ready to go and our secretary, let's call this meeting to order. I guess if we had a roll call first, then we'd know if we had a quorum.
Mr. Chair, I'll do the roll call.
Thank you.
Commissioner Suker,
Here.
Commissioner Lancaster,
Present.
Commissioner Purcell,
Here.
Commissioner Geis,
Here.
Commissioner Glick. I'm here. Ron Cayley, Commissioner Cott,
Here.
Commissioner Little,
Here.
Commissioner Wagner,
Here.
and Commissioner Yankee. Is he here? He's not.
I can see, I saw his picture.
Yeah, he might just be on mute.
Okay. Thank you
We do have a
for
quorum.
that. We got a quorum. And so would the select water people like to do any kind of introduction at this point?
This is Representative Larson, and I'm here, and I think Senator Hicks is online somewhere there.
Okay, I saw a flash that he was. Senator Hicks, would you like to say anything before we get going here?
No, Ellen, just let her roll. We just need to reflect for the minutes that myself and Representative Larson were in attendance.
Thank you. We would like to welcome everybody, and we'd like to do some audience introductions, and if Secretary Cayley would kind of head that up, starting in the room there.
Mr. Chairman, I will start. Brandon Gebhardt, Director of Water Development.
Okay?
Mike Rochelle, I'm a member of the commission at large. Barry Lawrence, Water Development Office.
Jody Green, Water Development Office.
Andrew Coleman, Water Development Office. Brian Wilson, Water Development Office.
Ron Cayley, Commissioner.
Water Development Office. Brian Wyman, State Engineer.
Thank you. Hopefully you can see the rest of us and we won't have to introduce ourselves. Anybody else like to introduce themselves? Thank you. Andrew, we thank you for all the work you've done putting legal documentation and verbiage together. And so can we have a motion on approval of minutes of our last meetings? 14.
I would move that we approve the minutes of the last meeting.
I second.
Senator Geis makes the motion, and Commissioner Yankee is a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried. Item number 5, emergency rules for emergency water projects. Probably Director Gebhardt, you can start us off on that.
You bet. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will pull up on the screen the first document that we'll be reviewing and provide a little bit of an explanation as to why these are involved as well. As we go through and make these rules, they tie back into other rules that currently exist. So those rules will have to be modified, and that's what we're doing with probably the first four discussion items, different chapters, and how this new rule intertwines with those and the modifications that went into it. Before we start on that, I thought I would give kind of a premise as to our thought as we were developing these rules, to kind of give you an idea of what our mind frame was as we started putting things on paper, and what we thought the law, the statute was and was intended to be. So the first thing is kind of a general premise that the emergency water project account, it's not intended to be a rehabilitation account for deferred maintenance or repairs that have been ignored. It's really to deal with an emergency when it arises, to put boots on the ground, and like I said, not necessarily to be a rehabilitation fund. We kind of viewed this more of a way to fund a project to bridge the gap between when the emergency starts and when other funding can get in place to make the repairs or take over in dealing with the emergency. So it's just that initial step to deal with the immediacy of an emergency. And some more specific, as we develop the kind of what we tried to do with the rules. The first thing would be, of course, is to determine sponsor eligibility. Also is to provide the information to the office and to the commission from an applicant or a sponsor to help determine what caused the failure or imminent failure. And I'll just say is when I say failure, go ahead and assume that I'm talking imminent failure as well. Also allows us to assess what the magnitude of the failure is. For example, is there a significant public safety issue, significant economic impact, or other large impact, not really intended to go out and fix a culvert under a road, but the failure needs to have some sort of significant impact, I believe, to qualify for the funding. Also to allow the commission to assess whether the sponsor could have or should have known about the problem prior to it becoming a problem. That gets back to deferred maintenance or ignoring a repair. Another component is, does the sponsor really need the funding, or does he have the forces to go out and deal with the repair and he just wants the funding? So that really the need of the funding. And then it also tries to set us up so that we're involved in how the repairs are to be done, and to help make sure that it's a good investment of state dollars. And then not finally, but one of the other key topics is to allow the commission to put sideboards on and kind of determine how long the emergency funding is in place. So it allows the commission to, under several different parameters, to say, hey, we're done with the emergency, time to pass it off onto either a new funding agency, or found out that maybe this didn't qualify, so we stop. Something to that effect. So as we go through these rules, these are kind of just to give you an idea of where our minds were at when we started to develop them. And also, as I go through this, I would offer any discussion at any time. We'll treat this more of a workshop type of a thing where everybody can provide input and try to hammer it out and get a final document at the end of this procedure. Andrew, I'll ask you, is right now a good time to talk about the next steps moving forward with the emergency rules, or do we want to go through the emergency rules and then come back to that?
I could talk just briefly about what we have to do for these rules. And then we can wait to talk about later rules.
Okay.
So the way that emergency rules work is the commission would approve them, and then they will go to the governor. They would become effective after the governor signs the rules and we provide them to the Secretary of State's office. At that point, they can only exist for 120 days before they would expire. You're allowed to renew emergency rules once for another 120 days, so we're talking a maximum of 240. I think based on looking at how we would need to run the regular rules, we're going to have to renew these the one time, and in order to do that, we will need to have the commission vote on them, I think in October, to renew the emergency rules so they don't expire before we have permanent rules in place.
I just want to pause for a second. Can everybody on the line hear us? He's kind of a ways from the speaker. Are we having trouble hearing him?
10-4.
The other thing I guess I will mention at this point too, so the bill has not gone into effect yet. That will happen July 1. And so today we're going to be discussing the rules and working to get everyone's feedback and make any improvements that need to be made. But the commission is going to need to have another meeting after July 1 in order to vote to approve the emergency rules. And at that point, then they can then go to the governor. So I think we were going to wait to talk about kind of the timing of all that later. But just so you know, just so you're aware of what we'll have to do for these rules.
Thank you, Andrew.
Question, doesn't what's the committee within the legislature that has to approve rules? Is that part of the process?
It's part of the regular rules, when we go to do permanent rules, part of the time period that's built in before the governor signs them as they go to the Legislative Service Office and their attorneys comment, and then they provide their comments to Management Council, who then, I think, sends a memo to the governor's office.
Who is the registrar of rules?
That's the Secretary of State's office.
Okay.
Any other questions at this time?
I have a question. This is Kellen.
Go ahead.
So as this goes through the public hearing process or public comment process as well, is that true?
Mr. Chairman, I'll answer that. So the emergency rules do not go through public comment period.
Okay,
Once we do the final rules, the formal rules, yes, there will be a 45-day public comment period. And those rules may be identical to what we're doing today, but we're just getting them in place in the event that an emergency happens between formal rulemaking and the time the bill becomes effective.
thank you.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, if it's okay, I'll start on chapter 1, which is the first, I guess, rule that will need some modification because of the emergency rule.
Okay,
On the document on the screen, I have basically, this is the same version that everybody has seen. I've just highlighted where the changes were. Section 1, Andrew, if I misspeak or you have anything to add, please jump in, or anybody. But the section 1, it includes 41-2-124 into our authorization to promulgate rules. Under section 3D, we developed a definition for EWP, which is Emergency Water Project Sponsor. And that was done to differentiate the normal sponsor definition between the Emergency Water Project Sponsor. The reason for that is throughout the rules, the sponsor is used under many of the normal program rules. So we wanted to differentiate that this sponsor is different from that, and the eligibility requirements and some of the other things may change depending on whether you're an emergency water project or just a regular sponsor. So that's the reason for that.
Comment?
Yes.
Shouldn't we spell that out there? Emergency water project sponsor? Because I know it's back in chapter 9, but just spell it out and then put the EWP in parentheses.
I think we could probably add emergency water project into the definition. I would probably advise keeping the sentence the way it is, and we could add a second sentence that specifies EWP means emergency water projects or
We
something
just
like
couldn't
that.
say emergency water project, friends, EWP sponsor.
Since we're defining the term, I thought this was a good place for us to use an acronym just to keep it short later on. But I think we could add in something to explain
It's okay.
in chapter 1.
All right, just so you had a reason to do it.
This is Mark. It's a little bit hard to hear the people in Cheyenne. Number two is I agree that somewhere we need to spell that EWP out somewhere. And the definition seemed to be a good place to do it, but just a thought.
Okay, well,
We have plenty of acronyms to keep track of, so that would help. I agree, Commissioner Cott and Commissioner Purcell.
so to address the trouble hearing, this is the speaker that, or the microphone that they're hearing, not these. These go to the live stream, so it's only this one that that we're talking to for them. So we'll try to speak up. If it's still having trouble hearing, please let me know and we'll make some different changes. Carrying on with...
Director?
Yes, sir.
Gephardt? Commissioner Cott, looks like there's a closed caption option too, if you want to kind of check that box and then maybe it can help. Okay, thanks. Commissioner Gephardt, go ahead.
Okay. So within the same chapter, we defined irrigation infrastructure, and that just ties it back to the legislation and the definition in there. And then under what will now be the new I, we added a sentence at the bottom of that. Again, that goes back to differentiating between EWP sponsor and regular sponsor and how we handle that through the rules. And I'll open up the next document. Which will be Chapter 2 for those following along with their papers. Okay, under Section 1 of this rule, the first thing that happened is meetings may be conducted through electronic means. All this did, this sentence was already in there at the end of the paragraph originally. It just moved it up to the front so that it wouldn't get confused with the new sentence that we added, which is, in addition to these persons, the director may also call meetings to consider emergency water projects. So basically what that's doing is granting the director the ability, once he sees an application, to call a meeting for an emergency consideration. And that was the gist of that. Chapter 3. So the first thing, or I guess the only thing that Chapter 3 did was added or other members of the commission. And this goes back to some of the things we've been doing recently in assigning commissioners the ability to sign contracts and documents. This language or other members of the commission wasn't originally in there. We were still covered just because of the director or his designee, but this just kind of clears it up a little bit. So that's all that this one did. And I believe the next one is Chapter 8. So the first thing that this did in Section 2 was added the term "and the commission." Just to facilitate, so now it just says to facilitate effective operation of the program and the commission, and this is in reference to delegation of duties. So to become more efficient with what the duties do. Carrying on to Section 3F, added in to allow the office to administer the emergency water project grants and loans, similar to what we do for level 3 construction grants and loans. And then at the very end of the document, under AB, this adds in the administration of the emergency water projects and a listing of what those duties are. So first would be to establish the payment schedules for emergency water projects, receive loan payments for the water projects, review and approve construction budgets, construction plans, and specifications. And I highlighted this different color. I'll come back to that. Review necessary permits required to construct the emergency project. Review and approve contracts for between the sponsor and their consultant or contractor for design and construction services. Review, approve, and process payments of grant and loans, and to serve as the Commission's representative on emergency water projects, and administer the voluntary pool program within the emergency water projects account. I'd come back to Roman numerat 3, or III. Review and approve construction budgets, contract plans, and specifications. This is one that we've kind of wrestled with as to what kind of liability would we assume. Are we going to hinder the efficiency of the emergency by doing a review? And is it something that we really want to do, but we also, on the same hand, want to be part of the conversation as to the repairs that they're recommending, trying to make sure that that's a good investment. Whereas it's something that they're going to put in and then take out in 2 weeks and spend a lot of money to do something that wasn't needed. So the thought really is to be at the table to kind of agree to the I guess the preferred alternative to make the repair. So I'd open up that for any thoughts or discussion.
This is Kellen. Go ahead, if somebody was before me.
Yeah, this is Mike Purcell. Is this language typical of our project agreements, Brian?
It is.
Brandon, I have a question on number 8. Can you help me understand what the voluntary pool program?
Yeah, so the voluntary pool program was part of the bill, and that allows any eligible entity to invest money into this account that would gain interest, and then they can use that money plus its interest to help cover their 25% of any emergency funding, their loan portion of the program. As we went through the bill-making process, this concept changed in a couple of different ways, but the way it is right now, and the way I think I would view treating it, is that it would allow them a place to put money, kind of a sinking fund, if you will. And we've had a lot of questions as to how liquid that would be. And I think the thought is that it would be liquid as they needed it to be, so long as they were using it for, well, I don't even know if we can define what they use it for, but I think the thought is, am I wrong, Andrew, that this would be liquid, or?
Well, the statute, I think, limits it to emergency water projects while it's inside the pool. But if someone wanted to come and remove it to withdraw it, I think because the money's really limited to that particular participant, I don't necessarily know why the state would need to try to hold on to the money once it was invested, because I think under the statute, another sponsor can't use it. It's most pool funds or the idea of multiple participants, and then there's a pool of money that can be drawn on for projects. The way the statute's set up here, it really is individual sub-accounts for each participant. And so your money is only used for your project. So if you would want to pull it out of the program, I think you could probably do so. I guess I don't know a reason why the commission would necessarily need to try and restrict that.
As I mentioned, that this component of the bill changed throughout the development, and it's much different now than what it was originally thought of. So it remained in there, but I think really all it does now is provides the opportunity to use the state as a bank account, for lack of better terms.
Thank you. I'm grateful for that clarification.
Mr. Chairman, so basically this would be a fund for insurance against emergencies that would be liquid and they could withdraw if they in fact don't need it.
That is correct.
But it couldn't be used for operation and maintenance, normal operation. It had to be related to a declared emergency.
If it were to be paid out of our account, yes. If they took it back out, then it's their money again and they can do what they want. Well, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, Larry Zucker with a question.
Go ahead,
Can you hear
Larry.
me? What I guess, when you look at this emergency, as it relates to me, there's a few things that stick out. And I guess, does any of it concern with the 25, 50, or the 100-year flood, or any act of God provision in it? I guess, generally speaking, an emergency would be flood or something that's unseen in some cases. I'm not saying all, because normal flows could contribute a factor too. But is any of these other ones, like I said, if you had a 50-year flood, would that kind of automatically, and had destruction due to that, would that enhance this provision also? Or I guess they're not mentioned anywhere here, but I just was wondering about it.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Zucker, the language of the bill specifically calls out that that's part of, that would make this program eligible. Any act of God, including fire, earthquake, hurricane, storm, or other similar natural disaster or phenomena. So that's kind of the thought behind the bill, is that if a flood were to occur and that's the cause of the failure, then that's kind of the intent of the bill.
Okay, I guess I missed and didn't see that in the bill.
Is that the question you're asking, Mr. Zucker?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think that says what was my concern.
Okay. I'd go back to, did anybody have any comments on the review, on our ability to review and approve construction budgets, plans, and specs?
I've got one, Director.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go.
Senator Hicks. One of the things when I was reviewing the rules that maybe you can help provide some edification, I'm trying to find the page. So on subsection, section 5, subsection B, it talks about once a project agreement in effect, the EPW sponsor shall submit to the office all eligible expenses. And so just a little discussion as to what would constitute an eligible expense, and would it be tiered back to the existing program? That's a pretty broad nebulous category, and just wondering if you could provide them. What's your idea of an eligible expense for an emergency water project? How did we delineate which is eligible?
It's a good question, Mr. Senator Hicks. I don't know that we really did. We would kind of be relying on our standard, rules that we have now. But there's also language in the bill that I think helps define what is eligible. And let me go to that. And again, that's broad as well.
Well, I think it defines eligible projects in the bill, but it didn't go so far as to develop what eligible expenditures were. So I'm just throwing a hypothetical. Well, let's say you have a major siphon or something that goes under a state highway collapses. Is it eligible expense to go back and reconstruct the state highway because the failure was the duct underneath the highway? Traffic management, is that an eligible expense? So I just think it's very broad and nebulous, and so maybe it's think about some way how we can tie that back to existing programs. But the way it is right now, I think it's a little too broad and nebulous, but I don't have an answer for the question either.
Okay, Andrew, did you have a response?
Yeah, I can add a little bit of information. So the language that we're talking about there, I believe, was pulled from either existing language in Chapter 7 for the normal projects, or it might have actually come out of the general provisions of Title 99 that were integrated into this. So the language like that, I believe, already exists in our rules in other places. But I think the fundamental thing the commission can go back to on this is that there's the emergency water project where it talks about the eligibility. Fundamentally, that could be the rule we use, is whether or not the expense is part of the project which has to consist only of repair, replacement, or maintenance that is required for the irrigation infrastructure which was rendered or is likely to be rendered permanently inoperable due to an act of God. So that can be what the core of the rule that we focus on. And so if there's something that gets outside of that definition, I think under the statute it wouldn't be eligible. As to specific examples, to try and lay those out ahead of time, I think that's something that we could try to work on, but fundamentally we do have a backstop, which is to test it against the language of the statute to make sure it is actually repair, replacement, or maintenance required for the irrigation infrastructure that was rendered or is likely to be rendered permanently inoperable. And due to that act of God, that unexpected event, as opposed to some other expected event. I hope that.
And that may cover it, going back to the statutes. A couple other questions, Director, and on the rules here. It was a little confusing for me when we lumped the funds and under the statute, it gives the commission the latitude to go up to 75%, but doesn't require the commission. And again, trying to make it consistent with existing programs. And I just wonder if we need to reference back at some point, whether it's in section uncodified 99 or someplace that just consistent with existing programs, the commission can go up to 75%, but you don't have to.
Yeah.
It's in the bill, but I don't know if we need to put it in rules. That's a question.
This is Andrew. Generally, from my office's viewpoint, so the feedback we would get from the AG's office is not to try to duplicate things from the statute in rules unless you really need to. And I think in this case, the statute does already set what the limit is, and it says no more than. And so for the grant amount, so that implies that the commission has the discretion to approve something that would be less.
To expand on that, we did have some of that discussion, and one of the what ifs that we threw out was if if we've got 2 emergencies that came in the door, and with the 75% funding for both of those emergencies exceeds what we have in that account, then we would definitely have to reduce what we could fund. But we wouldn't know what that percentage would be. We'd try to do as much as we could, but it may be 25%, it may be 50%.
Because we're stuck to the 3 million.
5 million, yeah, we're stuck to the 3 million per project, but
And
I
then
have
just
a-
one other, Mr.
Go ahead.
Director, one other comment, not a, just, when we go through in the bill and we enumerate acts of God, you gotta finish reading that sentence, because it says, or man-made events, and I think that we anticipated, if you had some type of terrorist activity or something, somebody went and dynamited the siphon below Buffalo Bill Dam or blew something up. So that's just a comment that would be considered an emergency, eligible for emergency water program funding under a man-made event. So,
and I don't think we did anything contrary to try to take that out, so I think we're covered there, Senator.
yeah, it's just a note of when you had the discussion about acts of God and 50-year events, and it's a little broader than just that.
Sure.
I have a question. This is Kellen.
Yeah, Kellen?
I think I read, but can we have some clarification on who can come in with their application? So let's go back to Senator Hicks's example of a culvert plugging up in with a cloudburst or whatever. Does the state of Wyoming get to come in and make an application to our emergency funding? Does YDOT get to come in and do that? Who's eligible to come in? Any district, any individual?
Mr. Chairman, the statute defines that only political subdivisions that own or have the legal responsibility to operate or maintain the irrigation infrastructure shall be eligible for these funds. And so we're looking at, it has to be a political subdivision. This is not a situation where we could do a private company, for instance, when we contemplate level 1 projects and we may not have a public entity formed yet. The statute requires that we have an existing political subdivision that has legal responsibility to operate or maintain the particular infrastructure that is affected. And so that does give us some pretty good sideboards.
Thank you.
So like a county trying to replace a culvert, they don't own an irrigation infrastructure at that point. That's road work and not irrigation, so.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for Brian.
Go ahead.
I'm getting back to Senator Hicks's eligible expenses for reimbursement. Are those set in our project agreements as well?
Well, Mr. Chairman, no, they're not. It's broadly defined. Again, we would look at it from the construction staff, if it's necessary to include in the project, yes. I always use the example of easements, for example. When you were around, we talked about easements that are necessary for the project, but anything above and beyond the easements, not going to pay for through the program.
So basically, you get to be judge and jury as to what fits under that definition in the project agreement.
That's correct.
I remember having lots of discussions about them a sponsor wanting to sue somebody after the fact, and we always said no to that. And it's worked.
And that's in our operating criteria. Attorney fees are project eligible for lawsuits.
Okay, thank you.
Back to Brandon.
Okay, so on your screen is still chapter 8. I think we've discussed that. I'll go ahead and pull up. We've started talking about the next chapter, which is chapter 9. That's really the meat of the discussion. If I can get my computer to work here. So, I don't know how anybody wants to do this, whether we go line by line or
Just maybe start reading it
okay.
and away we go.
Okay. So section 1, purpose. The purpose chapter 9 is to implement Wyoming statute 41 to 124 F through K by providing for eligibility determination, procedures and criteria for the application and award of funds from the emergency water projects account, and authorizing a voluntary pool program within the emergency water projects account. The provision in this chapter shall govern emergency water projects, and to the extent this chapter's provisions conflict with other provisions in these rules, this chapter shall control. Section 2, eligible projects and applicants. This basically just references the language in the bill. Says eligible emergency water projects shall meet the eligibility requirements under Wyoming statute 41 to 124 G through K. In addition, eligible applicants for emergency water projects shall meet the definitions of an EWP sponsor as defined in these rules. So section 3 then is the application process. Applications for emergency water projects shall be submitted to the office using forms prepared by the office. Applications for emergency water projects shall include a description of the emergency water project and the affected irrigation infrastructure. This description shall include, but is not limited to, the irrigation infrastructure and its current condition, the applicant's ownership of the irrigation infrastructure or its legal responsibility to operate or maintain the infrastructure, the applicant's services or water supply systems affected by the current or anticipated inoperability of the irrigation infrastructure, the threat to or effect on public safety, the amount of acreage, water, and users affected by the current or anticipated inoperability of the irrigation infrastructure. Any repairs, replacement, or maintenance that are currently known or anticipated to be required to make the affected irrigation infrastructure operable or to restore the applicant's affected services or water supply systems. Next page, G. Any investigations known or anticipated to be required for the emergency water project. Current estimated cost for the emergency water project and the EWP sponsor's proposed method of payment and requested financing. Maintenance and or repairs conducted on the irrigation infrastructure in the past. A description of how the irrigation infrastructure is to believe to have been rendered or likely to be rendered permanently inoperable due to an act of God, including fire, earthquake, hurricane, storm, or other similar natural disaster phenomena, or an unforeseen or impending natural or man-made event that requires immediate action to prevent a threat to or loss of life or property. This description shall include, but is not limited to, what rendered or is likely to render the infrastructure to fail or otherwise become permanently inoperable, when the applicant learned the irrigation infrastructure had been rendered or was likely to be rendered permanently inoperable, whether continued normal operation of the irrigation infrastructure for its intended permitted uses is likely to cause the infrastructure to fail or otherwise become permanently inoperable, whether normal operation of the irrigation infrastructure must cease to prevent the infrastructure from becoming permanently inoperable, consequences and estimated costs of the identified irrigation infrastructure failure, a list of applicants' past projects funded by the commission, including date of completion, financial capabilities of the applicant, including the annual budget for operation, maintenance, and replacement of applicant's water supply system, the existing balance in any emergency funds and sinking funds for applicant's water supply system, water rates, tap fees, and other revenue sources, and the amount of funding obtained from the revenues for operation and maintenance and replacement of the applicant's water supply system. Take a breath.
Just a quick question, Larry, here.
Go ahead.
Is it, all this information gonna be required to be engineered, stamped, or designed by an engineer? Are the questions answered by an engineer, or will it be okay if just the district does it themselves?
This would be fine for just the district to do that. This is
That's
the
a lot of
application.
work. That's a lot of work. You know, it's gonna take some time, you know, not an emergency, that's quite a few items here. But, you know, if that's what we got, that's what we got, but I would imagine, unless there's really good history with all, or the particular irrigation district, a lot of information required.
And I believe that much of this language came out of our normal application procedures. Is that,
Mr. Chairman,
That could take 3 or 4 days even to put that together, could it not, I suppose? Good.
Or more.
Or
This
more.
is- This is Kellen. I was wondering how fast we could have a turnaround. And that's question number one. And question number two is, once a district defines their emergency and they offer their solution, will the office say, I don't think that engineering will work, or is there some approval by in-house engineering that could give us some confidence that we're putting the money towards a proper solution?
so, Mr. Chairman, first question is how quickly can we turn this around? Are you asking about the process that once we receive an application, or are you asking the application process that the district has to go through?
Well, I just wondered how, like, it's kind of springboarding off of Larry's comment. These people will need money quickly to get their problem solved. We're going to have to meet as a commission and approve it. I just have some really fast system of seeing the engineering, having the confidence from the Water Development Office that their solution is viable, and then we vote on it and get them what they need.
Mr. Chairman, I think the first thing is the application is not necessarily going to have the design and the preferred fix. The application is to get them money so that they can start working towards that.
Okay?
So if you use Goshen for an example, they would have come to us the night that it failed with an application, and this would be a standard form, and they fill it out and they come to us, and I would anticipate that they're going to be requesting the funding before or at the same time that they're talking to an engineer to get them on the ground. So I think the intent and kind of what we're thinking as far as timelines on this is, as they're getting their assessments done and figuring out what the problem is, we're working side by side to have them funding in maybe as short as a few days to a week.
Well, I think that sounds reasonable if both of these can go at the same time. In other words, you can start the process and they can continue to build these items and fulfill the request that you are giving them. So if they can coincide with each other, but if they can't make an application until they have all these items, that could be a time delay structure. So I agree, if they can just make the application and then they can get you the information, at least the ball is on the road, you know.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, one of the other provisions that will happen with this is once the application's made, within 48 hours, we've got a meeting with the commission set up, and the district or the sponsor attends that meeting and explains the situation and provides information to you at that meeting. So I think that they could submit an incomplete application with the thought that that information we're still going to need at some point, but we can still act before the application is 100% complete.
Well, that answers my question. I think that's great. If you can do that, have both processes going at the same time, because you're not completing, you're not approving it until you got the backup information off of there anyway. And we would not vote on it based until we had it. But if they could make the application only, then bring the other items in, I think it would be quicker and more productive.
Yeah, Andrew, did you have something you wanted to add?
Mr. Chairman, I think that's all consistent with how I'm kind of viewing the way the rules can work. That was also one of the reasons why I suggested that we edit Chapter 2 to allow the director to call these emergency meetings so that as soon as you have something in hand, you can start the process to get the commission organized, and maybe as everyone's getting ready for that commission meeting, there can be additional information being provided and kind of supplemented so that the commission can be fully informed. And then also we do have the provisions in here where the applicant comes before the commission during that meeting and can provide and answer questions and argue, you know, for the merits of their project.
Does that help alleviate some concerns?
It does for me.
Yes, that helps.
You know, Mr. Chairman, as I look at this, I think I is pretty much small I, BI is probably necessary right away. And then I get to 2. And I can't think of, well, I think that's the kind of information that can follow. But if we wanted to shorten that list, I guess I looked down at 3, a list of the applicant's past projects. Hell, we got that on the computer. So it would seem like a prioritization might be nice that says, here's what I need right away. And then here's what I need. I need enough to know if it's an emergency. And, you know, we say estimated costs. Hell, nobody's going to have a good estimate until we get into it. But I don't know, is there a way to prioritize the information that we could have available in 2 to 3 days, or versus what we're going to need ultimately? I don't know. I will defer to you, but it seems to me that this is a week's work at least. And given the capability of some of the districts that we work with, it would be a challenge to turn this around that quickly. So, you know, I do get comfort by the fact that on the top of page B5, it says consideration of reimbursement of expended expenses, it should be, incurred prior to execution of the project agreement will be at the sole discretion of the commission. So if they have expenses the night it occurs, they can submit those for reimbursement. Is that right?
And it would be the commission's
Yeah.
approval whether that's eligible or not. That's
Yeah.
correct.
Okay. A thought, ignore it if you want, but I do think I think the first discussion is what do you think should be a quick turnaround that we're going to want? And what can they realistically provide in that time period? And if you agree that they can do all of Section 3, fine. I'm concerned.
Mr. Chairman, this is Dan Larson. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, go ahead, Dan.
Oh, okay, thank you. I guess I have one question. If they've had a project with the commission in the last couple of years, would the information being asked for not already be on hand by the commission? And could that not help out? I mean, is there any way to state in there that if you've had a project in the last couple of years, the information's pretty much there?
Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
Mr. Chairman, so 3, the way the language of this comes out of, I believe, a section in Chapter 7. So that's where that language came from. And I don't know that there's anything in here that require or that would prevent the office from being able to assist, sort of information, advising the commission on some of these items. I suspect there will be a lot of discussion between the office and the applicant when these emergencies happen. That's just my thoughts on it. So.
I would say that some of this information we would have. Some of the items that are specific to the event and what it impacts, we would not have. And so maybe we could go back and cull this to really ask the main questions of, is it eligible? Should have known about it? Some of those premises that we talked about early on, and cull it to those types of questions. And potentially, I don't know if we want to deal with if we have to deal with something else, maybe we deal with it in an agreement. I don't know.
Well, it seems to me that's the key is, that's the key is, can they rely on us for some funding assistance? We might not know how much funding assistance till we see the rest of it, but I think we can get enough to say, yeah, we're going to be able to help. To the extent of that help, we're going to need additional information. So I know you went to a lot of work with this, but if we could stage that, what are we going to need right away? And what am I going to need to determine the loan grant mix, financing plan?
So,
because we're not going to have an estimate that's worth a damn in a couple days.
I agree with that, and I maybe offer up a compromise. What if we had a system where the initial application we requested just the bare bones, and then following that meeting, then they're obligated to provide us the additional information, and we go ahead and list that out in the rules. This is the additional information, but we may not need it immediately. So we can just modify this language to put initial information, initial application, and then supplemental information following that. Does that sound reasonable to you, Andrew?
I think it does. And just for some background on how this was sort of structured, the application section here in 3, the details in this, I kind of suggested in kind of structuring it up front was that they would match up within the points that are in section 4 when it talks about the commission, what the commission may consider. And these are all non-exclusive lists. So for instance, if the applicant wanted to give us more information, that's great. And if the commission wanted to consider other factors, that's fine. But that's sort of the way I kind of thought in my head of structuring it. We list out in section 4, here's some factors, a non-exclusive list the commission may consider in determining if they want to fund it. And then sort of in order so that the commission can be advised by that time, just putting a lot of the details up in the application piece. But I don't see why we wouldn't be able to stagger it as you know, the director has suggested, so.
Mr. Chairman, Larry here again.
Go ahead,
Is there any way just to break it down into 2 applications? The emergency comes in and then the other items are within a moderate time in order before the commission makes a vote. Is there any way to do that? Maybe that would alleviate some of it. Maybe here's what could happen then. Say the emergency happens, maybe the board's capable of making out the initial application for this emergency. And then in the meantime, they get somebody that's experienced, an engineering firm or whatever, to do the other more significant part of the application. Would that be a possibility? And I think in reality, unless an irrigation district has an attorney or an engineer on their staff that can help them with some of these items of this application, I think it might be more smooth. That way we're notified that there's something there, and we do have an application that addresses the issue, and then we just have a certain gift time that we have to have the rest of the application complete. Does that work?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think, yeah, I agree.
I think the first application would be enough information you have up front, it's all here, but just be prioritized, is what do we need to be able to tell them we're in the game? And then the second application, or the supplemental application, is for us to put together the financing plan and prepare the project agreement.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's how it should be. Otherwise, it's going to be too far out, I'm afraid. And you know, every day is an element when there's an emergency. Every hour.
Right after we get the preliminary application, we'll have to give them parameters of what we may be able to do, but to the extent that what we are going to do is going to rely on the information we get in the supplemental. And but they'll know we're in the game, and we'll be able to, with that preliminary application, then within 48 hours, he could call a special meeting, and we can approve it subject to an ultimate project agreement. Is that all right, you think? Give it some thought. I'm sure you guys,
like it.
you and our director and our AG can, with Brian and everybody's help, can kind of figure out how to break that, but
Yeah, I think one of the things that we have to think through, though, is any piece of this information going to affect their eligibility? And that's got to be in the first phase.
Right.
For example, the statute does require to have that causation element of the act of God or the unanticipated or impending natural or man-made event. And so we definitely need something in the initial application for the commission to at least be able to make a determination at that point that they believe that exists.
Yeah, I can't see the commission being able to make a decision without that. So, you know, as you guys go through this list as to what you would need yourself to make a recommendation and what you could feel comfortable deferring till later.
I'll just add one point on some of that, just for the commission to keep in mind. This is an interesting program because of this causation piece. It's possible that we could have an event that occurs that at the time everyone believes was caused by a natural event or this unanticipated event, and then further investigation during the course of the project reveals that actually wasn't something that the cause was, or that some of the damage was not due to that. And so that's something that's going to be interesting for the commission as we work on these. Is these are probably going to require a lot more oversight or at least more interaction to check with the commission potentially, because the project's evolving. We don't know up front in order for the commission to approve it, and then kind of it goes off and does it. Some projects may work like that. Some projects may be kind of flowing, I don't know, as we determine there's more costs or we determine other issues. This is a little bit of a different animal than the normal program.
It's probably not as simple as what we're discussing here, but we'll leave it to you you've heard some concerns.
Yep.
And we'll let you address them.
Yep.
I think I'm
I have
much,
one comment that's just a little bit related. This is Kellen. So when we have that natural disaster, soon as you get information, could you pass it back to us as commissioners, especially when it's in our district? And if an engineer from Water Development's headed there to look at it, it'd be good for another set of eyes, even grabbing our senator or our representatives in the area, so we can go look at it too, just boots on the ground. Doesn't need to be in the criteria or the rules. It just needs to be just a courtesy or a information opportunity.
Yep. Mr. Chairman, I would think the first email or phone call that once we've learned of an emergency would be to this group.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the way it's been in the past, and this one would be no different, although I mostly am thinking out loud. Thank you.
All right, so
Back to you, Brandon.
thank you. I guess going back to the emergency rules, rather than continue reading the application, maybe we'll revise that to the initial application and then the additional information and circulate that back to you guys for comment, if that works. So I'll go ahead and skip down then to section 4, and this will be one of the things that we've got to think about as we're prioritizing the application. Then is these will be questions to you as what you view valuable for the evaluation that you'll be making and help us prioritize. So, and maybe that's more for us to propose to you, but so section 4A, prior to making recommendations to the State Land Investment Board regarding the application, the commission shall allow for comments from the applicant and receive the preliminary recommendations of the director. So this is the clause that we talked about, that at the meeting, the sponsor would have the opportunity to present his case. And that would be in addition to any application that he's filed. The commission shall evaluate applications for emergency water projects by considering information in the project application, the director's preliminary recommendations, the applicant's comments to the commission, and any other information presented to the commission regarding the proposed project. In preparing its recommendations to SLIB, the commission may consider factors including, but not limited to, whether the applicant and the proposed project are eligible for funding under Wyoming Statute 41-124 and these rules, the nature and condition of the inoperable irrigation infrastructure, the effects caused by the irrigation infrastructure being rendered permanently inoperable. Evaluation of the effects may include, but not limited to, public safety or the amount of affected acreage, water, or users. What rendered the irrigation infrastructure permanently inoperable? What is likely to render the irrigation infrastructure permanently inoperable, and the likelihood or urgency of that event? Whether continuing normal operation of the irrigation infrastructure for its intended or permitted uses is likely to cause the infrastructure to fail or otherwise become permanently inoperable, and whether that operation must cease to prevent inoperability. When the applicant learned the irrigation infrastructure had been rendered or was likely to be rendered permanently inoperable, the proposed or potential components of the emergency water project, evaluating, is that our echo? Evaluating the components may include, but not limited to, whether the proposed project would exceed the repair, replacement, or maintenance required to address the irrigation infrastructure's inoperability, the estimated or potential costs of the emergency water project, financial capabilities of the applicant, resources of the applicant to perform its own repairs or maintenance, proposed or potential other funding sources, including other potential forms of funding from the Commission, qualifications of engineers or other professionals the applicant proposes to work on the emergency water project, whether the applicant is current on all repayment obligations to the state, the applicant's past efforts to maintain the irrigation infrastructure. And D, after considering each application, the Commission shall vote whether to adopt, amend, or reject the Director's preliminary recommendations. The Commission's recommendations to fund an emergency water project shall be submitted to SLIB for the Board's consideration. Is there any comments or questions with that section?
Mr. Chairman, Mike Purcell, I think that fairly outlines what we need for the first blush of the application.
This is Larry here. Mr. Chairman, I've got some concerns. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's what I see. So this funding is coming out of our budget, is that correct?
It's a
Coming out of, we are putting money aside through the Water Development Commission for these funds, is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, it's a separate account that funding, half of it comes from us, half of it comes from SIPA. But it's a separate account within water development that deals only with these projects. And initially it'll have $5 million.
Okay, then my next question, then you had SLIB involved in this transaction of approval and of payment, is that correct? So the SLIB meeting, would there be a special meeting to conduct this? There's only 2 SLIB meetings generally in a year. For this type of emergency, unless there's a consideration of a special meeting for it. One takes place sometime in January and one's like June or something, okay? So with their authorization, it has to go to SLIB. SLIB is also going to approve it through the board, and then from there it goes to the SLIB meeting. Unless there's special provisions in a special meeting, this could be up to 6 months.
Mr. Chairman, if I may try to address that.
Go ahead.
Okay, so SLIB, the bill itself requires that SLIB approve the commission's recommendation. It's my understanding that SLIB can already meet on an emergency basis at any given time in short notice. And that would be the intent of something like this, is that we call our commission meeting, emergency meeting, and SLIB would do something very similar once we've made our recommendation.
Mr. Chairman, I've talked to one of the attorneys who helps represent SLIB and kind of discussed what this bill was, and from that discussion, I don't have a concern that SLIB would not be able to meet on a short basis if called upon for one of these projects. So.
That's good news. Larry, do you have any more questions?
I think that was the biggest one, you know, I think it would have to be that way, otherwise it wouldn't be an emergency, you know, by the time you got the money, you wouldn't need it. That's what I'll say. But anyway, with that answers my concerns about SLIB, and I know that's how it works unless there's special provisions for this to happen, so
And
I'm satisfied.
Mr. Chairman, I know that through the development of this bill that was considered throughout, that SLIB would always be the final approval of this, and that they were, at my understanding, they were willing to do the emergency meeting to accommodate.
Okay. Good with
news.
that.
Yep. All right, back to you, Brandon.
Okay. If there are no other comments, we'll go to section 5. This is project awarded funds. Emergency water project account funds shall not be released for an approved project until the commission has recommended funding the project and the State Land and Investment Board has approved funding the project. Unless otherwise authorized by the commission, an emergency water project account funds shall not be released until the EWP sponsor has executed a project agreement and, when applicable, a note and a security agreement with the commission. Construction of the project and construction administration inspection shall commence upon the office's issuance of a notice to proceed. Once the project agreement is in effect, the EWP sponsor shall submit to the office all eligible expenses for reimbursement. Upon review and approval of the office, reimbursement of eligible expenses shall be distributed to the EWP sponsor. Consideration of reimbursement of expenses incurred prior to execution of the project agreement will be at the sole discretion of the commission. The commission may review, modify, or terminate emergency water projects or their funding at any time after approval. However, to increase the emergency water projects account, I apologize, lost my spot. However, to increase the emergency water projects account funding for an ongoing emergency water project, the commission must make recommendations to the State Land and Investment Board, and the board must review and approve that recommendation prior to release of additional funds. So what this is saying then is if the commission in the approval through the application puts a dollar limit on the contract, then to go above that we'll need additional approval. Funding for an emergency water project shall cease when the commission determines the project is complete, the commission determines a suitable temporary fix is complete and services are temporarily restored, the commission determines the project costs are no longer eligible, or additional funding becomes available through the Water Development Program or other sources. Except as otherwise specifically provided by the commission, each emergency water project shall be subject to the following general conditions. Each EWP sponsor shall offer security for the emergency water project loan as deemed adequate and acceptable to the AG. The office shall establish repayment schedules for project loans in accordance with the conditions prescribed in this section. The date project benefits accrue to the EWT sponsor for purposes of triggering loan repayment schedules shall be determined by the commission. Each EWP sponsor or their representative shall supervise design and construction of the emergency water project and submit all requests for payments to the office for approval. Upon review and approval of the office, reimbursement of eligible expenses shall be distributed to the EWP sponsor. EWP sponsors shall not make construction funding commitments until after the office has reviewed and approved construction budgets and construction plans. The commission and the office shall make payments directly to the EWP sponsor. The EWP sponsor shall be responsible for operation and maintenance of the emergency water project. The EWP sponsor is responsible for all emergency water project expenditures in excess of the approved total project budget. If the commission determines that any EWP sponsor has, without good cause, abandoned completion of the emergency water project, the EWP sponsor, in addition to being required to repay the loan, shall be obligated to immediately repay the full amount of all grant funds actually expended, plus interest as established by the state auditor, in an amount equal to the interest that would have accrued on the expended funds in the emergency water projects account from the date of expenditure. Principal and interest payments made in repayment of loans shall be deposited in the emergency water projects account, and the EWP sponsor shall comply with applicable laws and procedures to procure construction and professional services.
That's pretty standard stuff. Oh, excuse me. Yeah.
That's a lot of the same language in our other programs. So then section 6 sets up the voluntary pool program. A voluntary pool program is authorized within the emergency water projects account. A political subdivision that meets the definition of an EWP sponsor in these rules may participate in the voluntary pool program. Each participant may contribute funds into a separate subaccount within the emergency water projects account. Funds within each participant's subaccount shall only be used for emergency water projects sponsored by that contributing participant. The office shall administer the voluntary pool program, including but not limited to receiving and depositing participants' contributions and dispersing pool funds for emergency water projects. At a participant's request, the office may withdraw funds from the participant's subaccount and return them to the participant. A participant that expends or withdraws all of the funds from its subaccount shall be removed from the participation in the voluntary pool program.
Really short rules.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go ahead.
I wish I was eligible. The treasurer does a hell of a lot better with interest rates than my banks, I'll tell you.
Mr. Chairman, I have one question.
Go ahead, Larry.
I just would like to make sure that the application form for the emergency grant is applicable. Is this a special application grant form? Because you know the SLIB is going to require one, a form. Or are they going to use the one that's already there that they use for other emergency grant applications? I guess that's my question. Because if they don't have the form, and if it's special, and I'm not saying it is, but I think it's something that we should find out. Because we're going to have to fill out that form and submit it to the SLIB. Is that correct? Nobody's going to do it for us. You're going to have to do it in our office. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, I believe at least the discussion I understood is that we would develop our own application form, and then we would have to get buy-off by SLIB, that they would accept that application form for their program. Is that, you're looking at me cross-eyed, Andrew, is that?
That's my question, because if there is something special, they should adopt it. If that's the case, make sure it's available, so they're not waiting on something that might not be there. Or if you're gonna develop it, maybe it should be developed so that there isn't a hitch there on what they're gonna accept or not. Because I know there's a lot to those. Build them out, and I've been involved in them. So I think that's another niche if we don't at least look at and see what's gonna be required from that end of the element. Could be time.
Mr. Chairman, I've had some discussions with the SLIB's attorney and making them aware what the project, what this program is, and having them start their thoughts on, what pieces are they going to need to do with their program to make sure they can do their part of this process. And I believe there will be additional discussions between the office and the Office of State Lands, who helps with SLIB, on determining things like, they generally do things through board matters, and sort of making sure that both agencies are on the same page as far as how those board matters are prepared and what information is required for SLIB. I anticipate, and this is just my personal view on it, is that it's likely that, that Water Development will be able to develop the application and get all the information necessary for the commission. The commission's recommendations will go, likely would go to the SLIB, and then there probably, I don't believe there would need to be necessarily another application or something that would need to be done. Everything that the commission had considered would be bundled up, and I believe, attached to an agenda listing for SLIB, and that's how I imagine we'll be able to make it work with them. I don't anticipate it'll be much more qualified than that. So I don't know that we need to worry too much about a different application, but I know that we'll be in discussions with SLIB's folks to make sure everybody's on the same page as to, what'll happen in this process.
Yeah, that answers my concern. Just make sure we don't have a niche there. Time is important, I think.
Thanks, Larry. Back to Brandon.
Mr. Chairman, that's the end of the rules. And I believe that we've got some modifications, particularly to the initial and then the subsequent applications that we will address. And I don't think that there are a lot of comments, but I don't think things that we needed to address unless I'm missing something.
Okay. Appreciate Andrew and Director Gephardt and all who've been involved in putting together sometimes tricky verbiage to spell out these rules.
Mr. Chairman, I have a couple of questions if it's appropriate.
Go ahead, Commissioner Yankee.
Yes, this is Bill. I know that we're making a distinction between a sponsor involved in the EWP and a sponsor that might be involved in water development's other programs. But my question is the criteria to be a sponsor, to be eligible as a sponsor for these two different things the same, or is it different? In other words, should we have an entity that's eligible as a sponsor for EWP, but would not be eligible as a sponsor for our other programs, or vice versa?
Mr. Chairman, I think it's likely that a sponsor for an EWP program should be able to qualify as a sponsor for the regular program, but I don't believe it would work in the reverse. For instance, a big key to this is dealing only with irrigation infrastructure. So that would, a lot of other projects would fall out right there. But I do believe, I think at this point that somebody who could be an EWP sponsor should be able to be a sponsor in the regular program.
Well, they have to be a public entity to get the grant, so that's pretty much what our other criteria is. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, Mike Purcell. Our other
Go ahead, Mike.
criteria is you have to be a public entity eligible to receive grant funds, and that's the same as this. It's, you can't be a private corporation.
Mr. Chairman, I might just add on that the intent of the emergency water sponsor definition is to tie it, to limit it to only irrigation. So it couldn't be somebody that doesn't own or maintain. So the reason for the different definitions is sponsors under a traditional program could be any sort of public entity, whereas the emergency water project is specifically for irrigation.
I see. Yeah, I see. That makes sense. I do have one more question. I just wonder what kind of discussion or maybe decisions have taken place within the office to be prepared for once this program is put in place, when we get the first call that there's an emergency. I mean, have you talked about protocols as, project manager immediately assigned, or how does it work in the office? Because obviously, and the point's been brought up several times in our discussion today, how much time is of the essence when one of these emergencies occur.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Yankee, funny you bring that up. Jason just offered this morning that he would get a pager and he would be the point contact for any emergency that comes in through the door. So we've got that taken care of. But
Great.
I'm just joking. Mr. Chairman, the way that the office operates now is always all hands on deck when these things come up. So it's just a matter of walking down the hall and getting 6 or 7 people together and figure out what the best way to handle the situation is, and kind of rely on each other's strengths and expertise to figure out the best people to help out with the situation. So nothing formal, but I don't foresee any issues with getting people together and addressing it quickly.
Good. Great. Thanks for addressing those questions.
Thank you. Does anybody want to make a motion that we do get a pager and have somebody carry it on the weekends?
As long as it's tied to Jason Mead, that's fine.
And Commissioner Purcell, he'd probably like to carry one. I can picture that.
No, thank you.
Okay, going forward.
I guess I would just say our major responsibility and conundrum is going to be, what is an emergency?
Yep.
And put on your hat and spurs and away we go. But there's no way to fix that in rules and regulations. It's kind of like we're going to have to deal with it on a case-by-case basis and then make sure we're consistent. I'm sitting here looking at the state engineer and I'm going, well, what happens? He's got a safety of dams group, and we've got dams in Wyoming right now that are under limited fill rules, and I can see that question coming to us, that basically the big old mean state engineers cut us back, so it's an emergency. So we're going to have to wrestle with those. And I don't think there's a darn thing we should or could do with these rules to accommodate that. I just think we're going to have to take it case by case and have the hard debate and discussion about whether it's eligible or not.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, before Greg speaks, that was kind of
Go
our
ahead.
thought as we were preparing these rules, is to give you the latitude and try to gather the information to use whatever information you wanted to use to make the determination, which doesn't make your job easier, but we're trying to get you.
Nor yours,
Right.
Mr. Chairman, but and then we're going to have to be let's say we do one particular project, and then we have another one just like it come in, every decision we make is gonna set a precedent on this, and, it's gonna be fun. But we're paid an extraordinary amount of money to take care of this particular problem.
Mr. Chairman, and Director, this is Greg Lanning. I appreciate Commissioner Purcell bringing me into the discussion because I've been thinking on several different tangents, one of those being safety of dams, and that's a great example. Whereas, at least for the high hazard dams, for instance, we have an emergency action plan for each of the dams. So it's a little bit in reverse, or we're able to, due to their unique nature, have a plan for each one of them, which includes Jason's pager number in each of those. But certainly inundation studies, et cetera, we kind of know ahead of time what damage to either public safety or dangers to public safety or damage to public property or property in general. So we're almost, we're kind of ahead of the game in terms of dams. But on the other hand, I spent a great deal of my career in emergency response. And I know this is an emergency funding bill, but when we hear one of the commissioners just mentioned time is of the essence, and it's on everybody's mind. If it's an emergency, we need to have something pretty quickly. And a lot of the discussion went to this application. In my mind, I think emergency response could be enhanced, and perhaps through rules, if the director himself or the office had some authority to go out there and some money to go with that. And what I'm thinking of is it looks like an emergency, and we heard also from the commission boots on the ground. And absolutely, somebody needs to get out there, and somebody needs to kind of truth it up. And the expenses might be minor in the beginning, just the expenses to get out there or whatever. But I'm thinking about two examples. One of them, Goshen, that's heavy on our minds. I mean, the longer that one went without any repair, the more at risk we were of losing all those crops, for instance, if we didn't get the water back in the ditch. We had a situation a couple of years ago up in the Riverton area where a head gate got washed out, a major head gate, because of a flood, and the river was seeking a new channel around that head gate. And what comes to mind is if we had the authority or the ability to get the dozer out there, the next day and stop a rather small situation from occurring, and as you know, when the flood goes, it starts taking everything with it, that we probably could have avoided. And if you talk to those folks up there now, I mean, it's a project that's over $5 million, and they're having difficulty, getting reimbursed for funds that FEMA's promised, these kinds of things. So I guess to sum it up, Director and Chairman, is that some authority in terms of response. The director or somebody under the director's authority, first of all, the director has authority to get out there and do something, but he has also a limited amount of funds available to him to make quick decisions. And I'm thinking a number of like $50,000 or something. He could call up and order out a bulldozer, perhaps, if we had. The other thing is this quick release or agreement, letter agreement with the sponsor or the owner. I realize that's, getting us into kind of a risky situation related to other issues, in terms of liability, but it's kind of the response that should, have a little attention, or one or two lines related to in rules would be my suggestion.
Thank you.
Good comments. Anybody else have any comments about the first boots on the ground on these emergency situations?
I've got a question for Andrew.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Greg brings up a good point that if there's something quick to do initially, it could save a lot of money down the road. Is the way the statute's written, does it give us that authority to do just that? If it doesn't, I think we take it back next legislative session and have them consider something like that. That's where I'm going.
And I think that's a good question. I think the way the statute's set up, it requires SLIB to approve any awards from the project or from the emergency water projects account prior to the release of funds. So I don't think there's the ability to, currently, to necessarily set up kind of an emergency response fund that would allow you to spend things like just hop in the car and drive over. It couldn't be, you couldn't award the funds from the account for that purpose until it was approved by SLIB. So there might be different ways that could be potentially addressed up front with budgeting or something like that, but essentially in order to get money out of the account, it's got to be approved by SLIB.
I guess conversely to that thought, though, is the commission still has the ability that if the owner elected to do that, he could still apply and the commission could still reimburse that cost. And then it would be, the direction would come from the sponsor, not our agency.
I think that's correct. Yeah, the commission could recommend to pay for those initial costs as part of the project, and so long as SLIB approved that as well, then yeah, I think so.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I guess I'll intervene and tell you my thoughts. That my big worry with this is that who gets the money, obviously, and what is an emergency. And an emergency, in my thoughts, is something, like an irrigation district that takes their whole 1 year budget would be what they would need to fix the emergency. If it's a rather small item, I would be very concerned that we're spending dollars on that. So I guess that is part of the discussion I'd like to have. How big does the emergency have to be? But it has to be comparable with what size the irrigation district is, I think.
Mr. Chairman, I might try to address that, and I agree completely with that. That was one of the things that we were wrestling with, if we could put numbers, percentages, or anything on that. But I think what we've tried to do is give the authority to the commission to consider that in their application, such that if they feel that the entity could just take their backhoe out and fix it, then they should do that and probably not be eligible for the funds. So I think the rules, at least the way I hope they read, give us that authority to decline an application based on that. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I just hope, I think the commission we have now probably would agree with that. You worry down the road, and I don't know if it could be put in the rules or not. I don't know what Senator Hicks thinks, but that is a concern of mine, that the emergency needs to be big, comparable to the district's availability of funds.
I agree, and I saw some verbiage that kind of addressed that, but that'll be the trickiest part, Representative Larson, that who really is deserving, and should they have done their O&M, should they have done their maintenance, and I'm hoping that these water operators are keeping diaries and taking pictures. I doubt that they are. I'm a little concerned about that. That helps them qualify faster, that's for sure.
Yeah, presently, the way it's written, the only thing we could say is that do it and it may be reimbursed, but that's not much help. But, I'm like the Wind River incident. I'm surprised that nobody stepped up and took care of it. Worked with those people a long time. It seems like they totally had the capability and equipment to get out there and do it.
I can speak to that a little bit because I actually went up there just as that project was, or that failure had happened, and at the time they were trying to do something, but the river kept coming up and up and up, and it exceeded the ability of their equipment and their capacity because it just didn't peak. It went above peak, and they got up there, they were working, and it just kept coming up, and it far exceeded the flood, anything that they could have possibly done with the equipment that they had at hands. One thing I would point out to the whole issue of the big, the way the statute's wrote, it says the commission can go up to 75% grant for the project. It gives the commission the discretion, if you have one of these come in and they have a significant level of financial reserves in the bank, it says it sets a maximum, it does not set a minimum. The way I would interpret that is this: the commission may have the authority to just do a loan at 4%. It says the only limitation is that you can't grant more than a maximum of 75% of the total project cost. So I think you have some discretion there to look at if somebody's got a large bank account, or you may make a determination that it's an emergency, but they certainly have the capacity financially to address a significant portion of that and do a much smaller grant side of that, not even go up to the 67%. So I don't know if that was something that would need to be clarified in rules, but the way the statute just sets the maximum grant, not the minimum.
Mr. Chairman, again, I hate to bring it up again and keep hitting this point, but I am really concerned about how we spend the emergency dollars. I would hope that in the rules somehow, I don't know if you could write them or not, or if you guys even want to consider it though, that I think there ought to be a percentage of a budget or something like that. It'd make it easier on you anyway.
But, Mr. Chairman, it's pretty clear, it's pretty clear in here, it's maximum 75% grant. And it can be 100% loan. I think that's pretty clear in what we've written, isn't it? And it's in the statute. And I think that financing plan is pretty typical with what we do with other projects. And I think our director indicated there's going to be times when we may not have the money. Let's say we get 2 or 3 of these at the one time, that loan grant mix is going to have to change with our available funding. So I think, Representative, you've got it covered in statute. And I'd far rather, I don't want to dilute what you have in statute and rules.
Representative Jefferson, any other thoughts?
Anyone else have any thoughts or discussion about that? All right, what's the next thing on our agenda? Where do we go now?
Mr. Chairman, if we're done with the emergency rule discussion, I was just going to update you all on a couple of things and then talk about future meeting schedule.
Brandon, if I may.
Yeah,
go ahead. Just one thing, there's been a lot of discussion, but I think we were remiss in going over how the program is funded through the legislature. So just a real quick update on that. So there's $2.5 million came out of the SIPA, $2.5 million out of account 1, and then we've also done a permanent diversion. So we've intercepted all of the earnings from the carry account which generates roughly, Treasurer's Office's estimate is about $31,000 a year. So that's a permanent diversion of that money that goes into this. So every year that money will revert in there. Any interest earned on that will also build on that account. That will, all those diversions will keep going. All the interest will keep generated by the account will keep going back into the account until the time at which it reaches $10 million. At that point in time, any interest earned on that account then reverts back to the general fund. But we did do a permanent diversion of those Carry Act funds, the interest off those that will flow into this account. So we can expect to see roughly a $30,000 to $31,000 a year infusion. And those were previously general fund monies that we've intercepted and done a permanent diversion until it gets to the 10 million. But that's just how the account will be funded. I'm just reading through the bill. The one thing that's not clear on me that's probably going to take an amendment is it's not explicit when it says if somebody's took out a loan and their loan payments and any interest that was accrued on those would go back into this account. I think it's implied, but it's not explicit on that. So we might have some minor amendments to this at the next session. So any of these other little fixes that we may need to do, if there is the desire to give some discretion, we could probably include that too in an amendment to the bill as we move forward. But just for everybody's FYI, that's how the account's funded.
Thanks, Senator Hicks. I'm glad you brought that up. I meant to address that, and I'm glad that we have money to put in there. Back to you, Brandon.
Okay, I guess one question for the group that I think we've assumed in the rules is that the interest from loans that we receive from the emergency water program, we have that going back into the emergency account.
Right.
So we do have that in the rules. I don't know if we're getting outside the law at that point.
Mr. Chairman, I will check into that to verify that would be permissible or not. It is possible that we may not be able to put that in rules, and that would be something that would need to be amended into the statute going forward.
We also say loan payments go back into the account.
That is correct, yeah.
So it's, yeah.
The principal and the interest.
Correct.
Thank you. That's helpful.
We'll just have to make sure we're not getting crosswise with the bill. Okay, Mr. Chairman, if you're ready, I can move on if we're done with, or answer any more questions on emergency.
Does anybody have any more discussion there? Let's go ahead and move on, Brandon.
Okay, just wanted real quickly to give you some updates on some of the other things that we've talked about. And the first one, Palisades water sales, we talked about that proposal that we submitted in our last meeting. They have formally accepted the proposal, and we're working through the agreement with IGWA on the Palisades water lease.
The reservoir is filling right up.
Perfect. That's the way we like it.
And then the fishing's good. Believe it or not. Not too muddy of water this year.
A couple of the other items, I was going to update you on some interim topics. So on June 1st, we testified in front of the Joint Ag Committee on the topic of aging infrastructure. And a couple things that came out of that discussion, we are developing, finalizing an irrigation survey that we'll be sending out to irrigation districts. This is kind of a side shoot from the existing irrigation survey we have. This one's going to focus more on what assets do they have, what's their vulnerabilities, and then kind of what do they anticipate costs for a period of up to 20 years broken out. And we're trying to really get specific information on what the vulnerabilities are around the state and could be coming to not only our program but need state assistance of some sort was kind of the ask. So we're trying to develop and issue that survey. And as we were discussing this and trying to provide information, the topic of preparing a couple of legislative bills came up. And at the time, I wasn't quick enough to deflect it and give the reason of why not to, but the bills that they wanted to look at, one was to change the funding stream so that account 2 got a little bit more money. Shortly after the meeting, it dawned on me that we've already got the capability to move money from account 1 to account 2. We do that not every year, but we've done it frequently with the omnibus water bills, and we request legislature to move money from one account to another and then fund projects that way, and we break out projects that are reliant on that transfer and not. So my preference is not to do any legislation. Let's continue to proceed as we always have and just handle it that way. I think we're fully capable of doing it that way. I did present that to Select Water Committee, and I think Select Water Committee agrees with that thinking as well. So I'm hopeful that we got it headed off before we start talking about making bills, but that's to be determined. Then the other bill that came up was the thought I mentioned this survey, and really for us to do any sort of condition assessment in the future, we need updates and we need participation to keep this thing updated. So the question was asked, should we make a bill that requires irrigation districts to participate in the survey? I didn't respond quick enough on that, but really we don't need a bill for that either, because we require anybody that uses our funding has to participate in the irrigation survey already. So rather than creating a bill, I think we amend our irrigation survey to incorporate this information we're requesting, leave it as is, and nothing really changes. So it's just a matter of adding information to the survey. Again,
Mr. Chairman, simply when you send out the survey, just say your participation in the survey will be a consideration in our future funding requests. that ought to get some interest.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Brandon.
Okay. So that's our interim topic that we're working with Joint Ag on through the interim. The next interim topic is with Select Water, and there were 2 topics with Select Water that pertain to the water development. One is the small water program and trying to figure out the best way to potentially cap or limit the explosion of that program. And so a couple of thoughts, and we'll prepare some information for the August meeting on this. A couple of thoughts we had, we will develop some alternatives as to for consideration to put a cap on that so that program doesn't balloon into something that everybody wants it to remain. So some of the thoughts are, just a flat dollar amount cap, and then we use our priority system to limit the funding. Another thought would be to revise or improve our prioritization. We've got several options that we'll be looking at, and we'll be presenting those to you in August. Another request, a discussion item, and it ultimately became a request, was to move the application deadline for the small water program up 1 month to December 1st rather than January 1st. And then that gives us a little more time to vet these projects out before the omnibus bills. And so we can have that discussion with the commission and have a better feel for what requests need to be made for the program. And then we will be providing Select Water Committee with a list of the past projects and their prioritization, and we're pulling that together currently. The next interim topic update, planning level studies application fees. We talked about this in the past. Again, in August, we'll come to you with some alternatives. They may look something like a flat rate increase, potentially some sort of a tiered increase, factoring in the entity's size as part of the fee. So we'll come with a couple alternatives on how we increase planning level application fees as well. So that's kind of my update on interim topics, unless anybody, Senator Hicks and Representative Larson were involved in some of those discussions, if you guys had anything to add. Okay. Moving on, legislative update. I have not heard anything concrete on a special session. I kind of expect that there will be one. There's a little conversation before the meeting that sounds like there may have been some voting on whether to have one or not, or when to have it, whatever it was, but that's still up in the air. But as part of this legislative update, I'll give you an update on, I'm pretty sure that everybody's seen the news that the governor has requested all agencies to develop plans to reduce their budgets. It's a three-phased approach that he has instituted and asked us for. So the first phase is one that we're currently under, and that is a hiring freeze of all positions. And then no new general fund contracts of $100,000 or more should be signed without approval. We're already in this phase right now, so no changes there. The next phase is to develop and present the governor's office with a plan to reduce budget by 10%. And those proposals are due July 1st. And then we'll be meeting with the governor's office on how that looks and making some decisions after that. Third phase is to prepare for future reductions. And the initial guidance is to prepare for an additional 10% reduction. But I think that the message is that there are a lot of unknowns at this time, so that number may change. But we are currently preparing for that additional 10% and budget reduction. So that is my legislative update. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks for that report. That's some pretty steep cuts in budget.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Anybody have anything else?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think Brandon did a pretty good job, kind of, where we're at. But I would tell you, those are more along the lines of either a best case or a likely case. They're not the worst case scenarios that the governor's laid out. We just had our appropriations committee earlier in the week. So the state's looking at just general fund budget, roughly about $900 million deficit. K through 12 schools, $1 billion deficit. By the time we get to July 1st of 2021, if we don't take significant actions, there'll only be $75 million left in our LSRA. There's $1.3 billion today. So that burns through almost the LSRA in 1 year. I will tell you, there's been some talk in management council that strictly, or specifically, I should say, deals with the federal or the mineral severance taxes that fund water development. Currently, you guys are lumped in with another group of counties and other projects. There's $155 million that we call under the cap. Those are distributed. Water development gets the bulk of those, and the way that priority system is, water development is the first one. So if the $155 million doesn't materialize, water development still gets their full percentage. But there has been some discussions in management councils to remove the cap. That may go down, and they may go after, the percentages that water development currently is funded with. We don't know the outcome of that yet, but I think this gets to the director's last conversation of the 10% by July 1st and the 10% for the next year. So one of the things I think Select Water Committee would like to have a discussion with the office and the commission is similar to the small water program, is what are the priority programs that water development is currently funding? And I think this will give us a little planning time. Hopefully we have a better case than a worst case scenario. But I would hate to be sitting here next year and trying to figure out, what is the priority programs? Is it basin planning? Is it small water? Is it weather mod? Is it university water research programs? I think those discussions should take place sooner than later. And I think that ought to be a broad discussion with the office, with the commission, and with Select Water moving forward. So I would hope at the August meeting, everybody could give that a little bit of a thought. And Brandon, if you could put together a list of all the programs that are currently implemented under the water development and get that out to the commission and the Select Water. So I don't anticipate that we need to make a decision at the August meeting, but I think we need to key the discussion up. And so people are going to start thinking the pros and cons, or what are the essential programs that we need to fund through water development. And then hopefully we don't have to go there, but I am not hopeful that there's not going to be a significant raid on water development. And I think Representative Larson can give you an update on where we're at with special session. So I would turn it over to him on that right now.
Well, thank you, Senator Hicks. Yeah, I think the special session, I just got an email that they've decided not to have it at the end of June, and it may be maybe like July 15th or something, but I'm sure that date might change also. There was a vote, and it came out that the legislators didn't want to have it. Didn't think it was needed, so we're happy with what the bills we'd sent to the governor, and it's on his desk to deal with it, so that's where we're at.
Thank you for those reports. Any other comments?
The only thing I would add on that is the discussion from the governor's, the budget office, and then our fiscal staff is the one message they keep sending out is consistent, is the quicker that we take action to start reducing, the better off we will be in the short and the long term versus running up to a fiscal cliff. I would concur with Representative Larson. At least with our leadership, they suggested that there is going to be another special session, and it will be a week to 2 week long session. That it is to rework the budget, whether that's July, August, September. All those dates have been thrown in here, but it's anticipated because of the budget crisis and the need to start taking action sooner than later. So we'll know more in August, but I would say start making plans, ladies and gentlemen, and hopefully we can figure out the best path forward. Thank you. Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Hicks.
Mr.
Thanks for the heads up.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Representative, the news doesn't get out to the golf course. What bills were passed just recently or in front of the governor?
Senator Hicks or Representative Larson, you want to help us with that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. We passed 3 of them in May. What was it, May 15th, I think, Senator Hicks?
Yeah.
And the governor signed them, and he vetoed part of one of them.
Yeah, basically, those 3 bills would deal with the distribution of the $1.25 billion of federal money that the state of Wyoming received as part of the COVID virus reimbursement.
Thank you. That answers my question. Very good.
Thanks, Senator Larson, for your update on legislative information too. Thanks to the commission for being available today, and to Brandon and Andrew and everybody who's put time into giving us the verbiage we are getting started with here that we need to go forward with. It's a little bit sobering to think about Senator Hicks's invitation to talk about this priority planning, but will each one of you think about that between now and the August meeting? He talked about small water, basin planning, UW research, and feasibility studies, what I added to it. And so we got to get more than serious. And anybody that's knowledgeable in that area and continue to think about it from day to day, and let's come back together and be ready and helpful attitudes. So Brandon, what's next on our agenda?
Mr. Chairman, the last remaining item is the future meeting schedule. The next scheduled meeting is August 12th through the 14th in Wheatland. And as an FYI, I think we mentioned earlier, we'll probably be calling a very short special meeting beginning of July to approve the rules. And we'll follow up with more information on that. We got some scheduling to work out with the governor's office to make sure that we get them a complete package. So if it's okay, I would just follow up with communication at some point in the future.
Thank you. Vice Chair Glick, have you got anything?
No, I really don't, but I guess I do have one thing.
The what?
To go back to the House Bill 81 on here, where it says,
do we need to, or do we talk about it later?
under section,
We can talk about it.
I guess it's on page 4, where it says, section K there. It says, flow regulating structures with, does that include diversions? Just a question.
Brandon, can you help us with that?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know exactly where he's pointing to, but a diversion, if we're talking emergency water program, I fully believe that a diversion is covered under this program. It is provided.
I believe that too. Senator Hicks is nodding his head, so.
Provided it's for irrigation and not a municipal drinking supply.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering if it was, the flow regulating structures included diversions, that's all. But if it's all agriculture, I guess it should be covered under there.
Yes, I think we are covered there.
Thank you, that's all I had to say.
Thanks, Clinton. Thanks to all commissioners. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to add?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, very quickly talk about the next steps of the emergency rules and then into formal rules. So emergency rules are, the maximum that they can be enacted is 120 days. We can extend that one time, so we really have to have the formal rules in place within 240 days after these rules become active. And we've gone through and looked at some of our meeting times and what that looks like. And I can share real quickly how that looks. So, Andrew, is there anything in specific that we talked about? Two different timelines. One would be with an extension and the other would be without an extension of the emergency rules. Is that accurate?
No, the timelines refer to, so on the right hand, the yellow, that's talking about what the timelines are for the emergency rules. So if the commission was to have a meeting on July 1 and the governor signed it right away, the maximum expiration after 240 days would put us in February 26th of next year. So that's as long as emergency rules could last. The timelines in green and blue are for the regular rules, and one of those timelines would start, timeline number one would be if the commission approved going out for public comment on the permanent rules at its August meeting, and then what that would look like. The public comment would happen over the course of late August and into September. It would end, I think, towards the end of September, the 45 days, and so the commission could then approve the comments. Oh, sorry, the comments would end on October 15th, the 45 days. So then the commission could approve the final rules to then get them to the governor to sign on November 6th at the November meeting. So we'd have to vote to initiate the rulemaking in August, and then we'd be able to vote on the rules after considering public comments in November. The timeline number two is an alternative timeline, if just depending upon what the commission's, schedule is going to look like for its next meetings. The alternative two is if the commission was going to meet in early July with a special meeting, kind of like this one, to initiate rulemaking, to say, let's put the permanent rules out for public comment, and then that would allow the commission to vote on the rules with that comment in hand at the October meeting instead of having to wait until November. But that, I just thought I would just come up with what the schedules might look like, given that the commission, I know, is busier at certain meetings than others. And I guess,
Commissioners, what do you think about an emergency meeting 20 days from now, July 1st?
Will it be telephone?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I think that we're gonna have to have that meeting irregardless to institute these emergency rules. If we don't institute emergency rules, the law becomes effective and we would be traversing this law without any rules in place, and we could get an application. So I think the July 1st meeting would likely be a video or telephone call. It'd be very short. It would just be to approve these emergency rules. The question at hand, though, is what is your preference for moving forward with the real rules, the permanent rules? Would you want to start that process in July and go to public comment? Or do we want to start that, have more discussion at our August meeting, and then start the public comment and the formal permanent rule promulgation?
Mr. Chairman, Mike Purcell, I think we bite the bullet and streamline it if we can.
I'll second that.
Let's do it.
July 1st.
I think it's possible to do. I think one thing to just consider as we're trying to get that scheduled and everything, I think July 1st has been a date we've been talking with the governor's office a bit on. But if the commission did need to try and move that meeting just because of availability or something back a little bit into July, we do have some room where we could still do the 45 days comment and still vote on the final rules in October. So,
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Let's take a quick roll call to see if we could have a quorum on July 1st.
Any commissioner who can be there, say aye.
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 That was about 6 or 7, so we're only missing,
Aye.
there, that's 7. We can be there.
That'll be a 1 o'clock meeting?
1:30.
1 or 1:30,
1:30 meeting.
Okay. Okay.
July
Just so I
1st.
get it in the black book.
Andrew, you okay with that?
That's a Wednesday this time instead of a Thursday.
Good,
Yeah.
Wednesday's on Thursday. I'm missing golf today.
Okay, we'll get you to your golf game. If anybody, what else do we need to do, Brandon? Is that everything?
Mr. Chairman, that's it. Thank you.
Can we have a motion to dismiss? Do we need one?
Make
I'll
a
move that
motion,
we
we adjourn.
adjourn.
I think you got
Senator,
nine motions.
that sounded like Larry and Senator Geis. And
He's younger than I am, let him have it.
You got enough of us, huh?
all in favor, say aye.
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 Anybody who doesn't want to end the meeting, say nay. Motion carried. Appreciate all you guys. We got some good things. We did some good things, and we'll have to do some tough things in the next months as we help with the shortage of money in the state.
I've been there before.
Me too.
Sure appreciate that we have experienced people that can help us navigate then. Okay, everybody
you
be
all.
safe.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thanks, Brandon and Andrew. It was awesome.